Today is May 19th, and I had a vision over this last week that I wanted to share. The vision starts where there's a train coming forward, and I feel like in another vision I have seen this train before. It's a train that is a children's train from the TV show Thomas the Train, so it's a kid's train. And then the train turns into sort of like a futuristic train. And the train is smooth and silver-colored, light silver, almost a white gold maybe even. Smooth to the touch, like a bullet-type train. It reminded me of a bullet. And this train was, like I said, futuristic, but when you looked inside of it, the boxcar that it was in was old-fashioned. It was all made of wood all the way around. And there was a stack of straw almost to where there wasn't a lot of room left in the boxcar, maybe about 3 feet or a little more room left at the top. And laying in the straw were these sort of a cylinder type, they remind me, so they're about maybe a foot long, and they remind me of like the shape of a pill, maybe like a Tylenol or something, like a gel cap, a Tylenol gel cap, something like that. Anyways, these cylinder shapes were about 4 in a line, and I'm not sure how many wide, how many long, how many were there. But like I said, they're about maybe 3 to 4 inches wide and about a foot long. And they were clear, and they had a clear liquid inside. And they almost looked cold to the touch. Like they just came out of, when something comes out of the freezer and it's starting to defrost and it's just like got condensation on the outside. It looked like that. And so I asked the Lord what was inside of these cylinders. And almost like a balloon, one of them sort of, where, how when you let the air out of a balloon, the bottom part kind of opens and the stuff comes out of it, water comes out of it, it's a water balloon or whatever. It started to come out like that, and it kind of came across the sky. And across the sky, it was first written in a different language, Hebrew or Greek or something. And then it turned to English, and it said the words, Kingdom Water. And then a series of events happened after this. It started with Moses, when Moses hit the rock and the water came out. I saw Moses hitting the rock, and then water came out and gushed out, and then the water dried up and stopped. I don't know if that's what happens in the Bible, but that's what I saw. It came out, it flowed out, and then it ended up stopping and dripping off. And then the next thing that I saw was Jesus on the cross, and the soldier had come and pierced his side, and the water gushed out, and then it slowed and stopped and dripped. And then the third thing that I saw was Jerusalem, and it had a circle around it, like a gate, or a gate and a fence or whatever it's called, but it was like clay or whatever. Anyway, and it encircled Jerusalem, and then over Jerusalem, these clay pitchers, and I'm not sure how many, there was maybe 5, maybe more, they began to pour over water over Jerusalem, and they poured until their their container was emptied. And so after that, I saw Jesus coming out of his tomb, and he either had a sword with him or picked up a sword. And he came and he walked forward out of the tomb. And on dry ground he came, he lifted the sword above him, and he shoved the sword into the ground. And the earth began to sort of crack and pull away and started to form sort of a gap. And as he shoved the sword into the ground, his clothes changed toward like a glowing white, and he had a crown on. And as this is happening, as the sword is in and a gap is starting to divide, I started having this conversation within myself about my sin. I don't know where it came from, but it was a conversation that I actually have often about feeling like I'm continuing in sin, even though what Jesus has done for me. I continue in my sin, and it sort of brings on guilt and disappointment and things I shouldn't feel. So I began to pray and talk to God, and I was saying things like, Lord, I want to believe in your truth about this, about what you've done. You paid for this, and began to speak this truth over my sin. And as I was doing that, Jesus lifted the sword, went back to the vision, and Jesus lifted the sword out of the ground, rose it above his head, and with force chopped at the root of the sin. And then he lifted it up again over his head and began to chop again at the root of another sin and just cut it deep, and he cut it out. It was very powerful. And then he plunged the sword back into the ground, and it went in deep this time, even deeper still, deeper and deeper. And it created a huge chasm, a huge gap. And in between this gap, this water came out. It came forth over sort of by either where the tomb was or from behind it. I'm not sure, but in the same direction, it came from that direction Jesus came from, and then began to fill this gap. And this gap, it sort of led down, and you could see that it was going down into this dry, parched land. And about, I don't know how far away, but I want to say, I can't even say 100 feet, maybe more, 1,000 feet, I don't know. In front of me was this garden, but it was very clear that there was quite a bit of feet of dry, parched land. And then it came up to this garden, and it was just literally like a line was drawn, and it was dry land and garden right behind it. And so this water flowed into this garden. And that was the end of the vision. Just now, as I turned off the recording, before I decided to finish it, I asked the Lord if there was anything else he wanted to show me to just wrap this up. And he immediately showed me a little bit more of this vision. As I described just a moment ago, how there was the dry land, quite a bit of feet of dry land, parched land before you got to the garden. I saw the water coming sort of through the chasm towards the garden, but on the side it began to sort of seep into that dirt a little bit and soften that dirt to make it pliable or movable or something like that. And I saw some men, they had on them that white cloth over their heads. They were dressed in sort of they were Jewish men, Israelites, and they went out into this dry land, and they began to dig sort of a long ditch in this dirt. And they dug, and it ended up being a row of men, and it meant maybe 10, 12 men. And they were in this line, and they were digging and digging and digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And then they got to a point to where some of the water from the main vein got over to their ditch. And it was very minimal water, maybe an inch or an inch. Just barely any at all. And the men jumped down, and they got into that water, and they began to wash their faces and wash their hair. And they were just washing. Then I saw them take something off of them, like a necklace or something, or, and then I looked at it. It ended up being, I'm going to butcher the name. It's what the priests wore. I don't know the name. I can see the word spelled, but I will not pronounce it right. They took that off and put that in the water and began to scrub it with their outfit. I forgot what that's called too all of a sudden. With their clothes, I guess. They began to scrub it with their clothes. Scrub in this water. And then they picked it up and looked at it, and it looked good to them. And then they put it back on, and they climbed out on the side of where the garden was, and they began to walk towards the garden. And as these men began to walk towards the garden, a bunch of people began to walk towards the garden as well. And it looked like they were just from all shapes and sizes, all different places, and they began to go towards the garden as well. Now that's the end of the vision.